Welcome, everyone, to another deep dive. Ever just stop in the middle of your day and wonder exactly why you do the things you do? Like why you reacted a certain way to a text message or why some random smell suddenly brings back this massive flood of childhood memories? Well, today we're embarking on a pretty incredible journey right into the very center of who we are to answer those exact questions. In this explainer, we're going to unlock the mind. We'll be starting at the absolute microscopic level, literally looking at the raw biology and chemistry inside our heads and zooming all the way out to observe the massive, complex scale of human crowds and societal behavior. So whether you're a dedicated student of the mind or just, deeply curious about the human experience, you are in the exact right place. Get ready for a highly focused tour through the totally fascinating world of human psychology. Okay, let's dive into this by defining the core baseline of our topic. Psychology is, at its core, the scientific study of mind and behavior. It's really the definitive framework for explaining how humans think, feel, and act across just a limitless variety of situations. But why does this actually matter to you? Because psychology isn't just about reading minds or analyzing dreams from a fancy couch. It is literally the operating manual for human existence. It's a rigorous, incredibly detailed science that maps out the underlying architecture of your daily experience. We're going to look at exactly how we process the world around us, basically breaking down the invisible mechanics that govern our everyday realities. So here's our roadmap for how we're going to tackle this. We'll start with the biological hardware in the brain and nervous system. Then we'll move into memory, intelligence, and learning. From there, we'll explore motivation, emotion, and personality. Section 4 will touch on mental health and coping before we finally zoom all the way out into social psychology and groups. Let's start right at the physical base of it all. Section 1, the brain and nervous system, the biological foundation of everything you consider to be you. So the crucial point is that this physical organ, the brain, controls absolutely all body functions and behavior. But honestly, to just call it an organ almost feels like an understatement. Inside that brain is this glowing, bustling network of microscopic cells called neurons. We're talking about roughly 86 billion neurons, firing electrical signals back and forth at speeds of up to 268 miles per hour. In fact, right now, your brain is actually generating enough continuous electricity to power a small LED light bulb. Crazy, right? These rapid-fire synapses act as the central command center for everything we do. It's precisely this physical transmission of signals that allows us to think complex thoughts, move our limbs, and vividly feel our emotions. Without this physical hardware running seamlessly in the background, literally nothing else we're about to discuss today is even possible. Now that we understand the physical hardware, we really need to look at the cognitive software. Section 2, memory, intelligence, and learning. This is all about individual cognition. Think of your memory like a highly dynamic filing system. The cognitive process works in 3 distinct rapid-fire steps: encoding, storing, and retrieving. First, you encode information, like paying attention to the sound of my voice right now, while kind of filtering out the background noise in your room. Then you store it. You're essentially filing it away by creating new physical neural pathways in your brain. Finally, you retrieve it when you need it. Think about the last time you heard a specific song on the radio, and you were just instantly, viscerally transported back to a specific childhood memory. You didn't even have to try, right? That's retrieval happening in real time. That's your brain actively running this 3-step sequence, shifting cognitive files from temporary folders to permanent storage and pulling them right back up on demand. And this brilliantly illustrates how memory retrieval actually informs our learning. Here we have a fascinating comparison of the 2 major ways we learn through conditioning. First, there's Ivan Pavlov's classical conditioning, which is learning through simple association. You've probably heard of the famous experiment where a dog learns to drool at the mere sound of a bell. But hey, this isn't just about dogs. It's exactly why you might automatically, almost unconsciously, reach right into your pocket the absolute second you hear a generic phone buzz. You have deeply associated that sound with a message. Then on the flip side, we have B.F. Skinner's operant conditioning, which is learning through a system of rewards and punishments. This is learning based entirely on consequences. It perfectly explains why we put in 40 hours of hard work a week to get a paycheck. Or, to put it in a more modern context, it's the exact psychological mechanism behind why we keep checking social media. Those little red notification bubbles, they act as a powerful positive reinforcement, a tiny reward that just keeps us constantly scrolling. 2 very different mechanisms, but both are deeply dictating our daily learned behaviors. So, binding our memory and learning together is intelligence. Intelligence is fundamentally defined as the ability to learn, understand, and solve problems. Now, traditionally, this is typically measured by IQ tests to assess cognitive abilities, but modern psychology recognizes that intelligence isn't just a static number written on a test. It's a highly adaptable toolkit. If memory is your internal database and learning is your programming, intelligence is the ultimate puzzle-solving processing power that connects those encoded memories and learned behaviors so you can successfully navigate entirely new challenges. Let's transition from pure logical cognition into a much more complex and deeply human realm. Section 3, Motivation, Emotion, and Personality, the personal identity. Here we see two incredibly powerful yet distinctly different forces that drive everything we do. Motivation is the energy that drives our behavior. It's the core engine pushing us forward, basically forcing us to get out of bed, strive for our goals, and ultimately survive. Emotion, on the other hand, consists of the feelings that directly influence our decisions and reactions. Think of it this way. Motivation is the engine that gets you to finally apply for that daunting, high-level job. But emotion is the nervous, sweaty excitement you feel during the actual interview. If motivation is the engine, emotions are the hands gripping the steering wheel, actively guiding the direction of our choices. Together, they shape our actions profoundly. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how Sigmund Freud broke down this intersection of drive and feeling. He proposed this constant three-way internal tug-of-war. The id is our most basic, primal layer. Think of the id like a toddler throwing a massive tantrum in a grocery store because they want candy right now. It demands immediate gratification. On the completely opposite end of the spectrum is the superego. This is our strict moral compass, dictating societal rules and proper behavior, kind of like a strict headmaster. And caught right in the middle, just trying to keep the peace, is the ego. The ego desperately tries to manage reality, acting as the exhausted referee who constantly has to balance our deepest, primal desires against our highest moral standards. It is just a never-ending internal negotiation. But what happens when that internal balancing act simply becomes way too overwhelming? This brings us to Section 4, Mental Health and Coping. Internal Challenges. Abnormal psychology is the dedicated scientific study and treatment of mental disorders and behavioral issues. It approaches conditions like anxiety, depression, and fragmented thoughts not as personal feelings, but as complex medical and psychological realities. Think about it this way. If you break a bone in your arm, you immediately go to a doctor to get an X-ray and a cast. Mental health is absolutely no different. It requires objective study, diagnostic understanding, and strategic treatment. This is a vital medical science completely focused on mapping out these internal challenges, removing the societal stigma through rigorous science, and helping to bring individuals from a dark place back into the light. A completely universal component of this human experience is stress, which is quite simply the body's reaction to pressure. We all face it every single day, right? The difference between being completely overwhelmed and maintaining psychological health often lies in the practical coping strategies we use. This is why practical tools like meditation, physical exercise, and relying on strong support systems are proven mechanisms to process that pressure. For example, physical exercise doesn't just distract your mind, it actively, chemically burns off the excess cortisol that your body creates during stressful situations. Meanwhile, practices like meditation actually help physically rewire your brain's reactivity over time. So these aren't just trendy buzzwords. They are daily, highly effective strategies that help quiet the noise and restore our vital mental equilibrium. Take a second to think about everything we just covered regarding the individual mind. The billions of firing neurons, the complex memories, the internal personality referee, and our coping strategies. But what happens when individual minds actually join a crowd? Which leads us to our final massive leap in scale. Section 5, Social Psychology and Groups, the macro world. Let's move to and see how this builds into an entirely new ecosystem. Social psychology studies exactly how people behave in groups. Suddenly, we aren't just dealing with our own internal ego or superego. We're dealing with a massive network of invisible lines of influence. We look at social influence, how we adapt to teamwork, and the incredibly powerful, almost frightening pull of conformity. Conformity is where individuals will completely alter their own actions and deeply held beliefs just to match the crowd. Think about walking into a crowded elevator where, for some completely unknown reason, everyone is facing the back wall. Almost instantly, you'll feel an overwhelming magnetic urge to turn around and face the back wall too, even though you know it's totally illogical. That is the invisible, undeniable power of social influence. In groups, our psychology is fundamentally reshaped by the social interactions surrounding us. Which leaves us with a really fascinating and, honestly, perhaps slightly unsettling question to end on today. Looking back at the biological neurons firing in your brain at lightning speed, the operant conditioning you've learned from your past, the constant internal tug of war of your personality, and the incredibly heavy influence of the groups around you, are your choices truly your own? Or are they simply the result of conditioning, chemistry, and the crowd? I highly encourage you to view your own behavior this week through the lens of everything we've just explored. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and remember to always keep questioning the world around you.
All right, welcome to today's explainer. Today we are opening up the ultimate user's manual to, well, you. We're embarking on a deep dive into the architecture of the human brain, from the absolute tiniest microscopic processes happening right this very second inside your nervous system, all the way zoomed out to the macroscopic ways we navigate, conform, and adapt to the world around us. We're going to unpack the exact mechanics of human behavior.
Okay, let's dive into this roadmap. We'll be covering the engine of your mind, how we learn and remember, what drives your behavior, navigating stress and mental health, and finally, intelligence and social behavior.
Section 1. The engine of your mind, the foundational hardware of human thought.
You know, when we talk about psychology, it's honestly pretty easy to think of it as some abstract philosophy. But framing the mind as a rigorous scientific study, that shifts our entire perspective. It forces us to stop viewing human behavior as this unpredictable, mysterious magic and start viewing it as a highly predictable, mechanical output based on specific inputs. It's the vital science of understanding our reactions, the precise mechanisms of how we think, feel, and act when exposed to incredibly complex situations.
And that predictability, it is built entirely on a very physical foundation, your nervous system. Every single action you take is controlled by a network of neurons firing electrical signals. To truly grasp the scale of this, realize that your brain contains roughly 86 billion neurons, forming trillions of interconnected synaptic pathways. When you have a thought or experience an intense emotion, it's not just some fleeting idea floating in space. It is a tangible, physical event. These rapid-fire electrical sparks are transmitting the exact codes that contract your muscles, process what you see and hear, and generate your entire emotional landscape. It's a staggering biological control center, and it's operating at lightning speed.
Section 2. How we learn and remember. Processing our world.
So, to understand how that biological hardware adapts to its environment, we have to look at how memory helps us learn from past experiences. It's this beautifully simple three-step sequence: encoding, storing, and retrieving. Let's walk through this in real time. Imagine you're learning a complicated new route to your office. During the encoding phase, your brain is actively transforming the raw visual data of street signs and buildings into a usable biological format. Then, in the storing phase, it physically fortifies those specific neural pathways, so the map of that route is kept intact over time. Finally, the retrieving phase kicks in the next morning when you pull that stored map back into your conscious mind to actually make the drive. It's this elegant, deeply physical loop of continuously updating your internal software.
And this ongoing updating process completely dictates our behavior. Two foundational theories explain exactly how this works. Classical conditioning, famously demonstrated by Ivan Pavlov, relies entirely on involuntary, automatic associations. An organism learns to physically react to a completely neutral stimulus. Think of Pavlov's dog salivating just at the sound of a bell. Operant conditioning, championed by B.F. Skinner, shifts into the realm of voluntary action influenced by the environment. It is learning through rewards and punishment, and it literally rewires your neural pathways based on outcomes. Think about the highly engineered operant conditioning we all experience every single day. You know that quick dopamine hit when your smartphone pings with a notification? Your brain biologically registers that digital reward, absolutely ensuring you're going to voluntarily check that screen again and again.
Section 3. What drives your behavior? Internal motivations and conflicts.
So, if learning is how we adapt to our environment, what are the invisible forces actually pushing us forward in the first place? Well, motivation drives our actions, while emotions influence our decisions and reactions. And these two forces work intimately together to deeply shape what we do. Think of motivation as the engine. It generates the raw power and momentum necessary to get you moving toward a specific goal, like grabbing lunch or grinding for a promotion. Emotion, on the other hand, is the steering wheel. It actively guides your choices in real time based on how you feel, heavily influencing whether you aggressively swerve toward an opportunity or rapidly pull back in fear.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how the famed psychoanalyst Sigmund Freud broke down the intense internal conflict between these drives. He introduced a three-part personality structure: the id, the ego, and the superego. Let's ground this in a struggle we all know. Imagine you are exhausted, hungry, and staring down a very tempting dessert. Your id, representing your primal, deeply unconscious desires, is screaming at you to consume the sugar instantly for immediate gratification. Your superego, essentially your moral compass, violently pushes back, reminding you of your strict health goals and what you quote-unquote should do. And the ego? It's the conscious mediator trapped right in the middle, trying to negotiate a realistic, pragmatic balance between your primal biological urges and your long-term ideals. It is literally a constant, invisible tug-of-war happening inside your mind all day long.
Section 4. Navigating Stress and Mental Health. When the system overloads.
Let's slow down for a second here. Stress is the body's reaction to pressure. That statement sounds incredibly simple, doesn't it? But the biological reality of that pressure is profound. When the demands of your environment exceed your perceived ability to cope, your internal architecture physically strains. Your brain floods your body with cortisol and adrenaline, preparing for a threat. If that pressure doesn't release, it leads to severe neural fatigue, anxiety, and depression. Abnormal psychology zeroes in on these very real mental disorders when the hardware is pushed far past its limits. It focuses deeply on the mechanics of these conditions to find effective, clinical treatments to navigate the biological overload.
And this brilliantly illustrates the practical, actionable takeaways for managing that stress. Bringing the system back online requires proven, healthy coping mechanisms. Strategies like meditation, regular exercise, and building robust support systems, they aren't just trendy wellness buzzwords. They are profound biological interventions. When you engage in regular aerobic exercise, for instance, you are physically flushing those stress hormones out of your bloodstream and actively stimulating the production of endorphins. You are deliberately altering the chemical environment of your brain, using your physical hardware to bring your central nervous system back into a stable, regulated state.
So we've spent a lot of time looking at the isolated, individual mind. We know how the hardware works, how it learns, and how it manages extreme pressure. But what happens when your unique, highly calibrated brain joins a crowd? Section 5. Intelligence and Social Behavior. Interacting with the world.
So the crucial point is, to understand group dynamics, we first have to look at the individual's cognitive toolkit. Intelligence is the ability to learn, understand, and solve problems. But more profoundly, it is your brain's ultimate algorithm for resource management and environmental adaptation. It dictates how efficiently you can process complex variables and execute successful strategies. And while IQ tests are the tool we use to try and measure these specific cognitive abilities, raw processing power alone doesn't dictate how you'll actually behave when the environment becomes social.
Because when we enter the realm of social psychology, the rules completely change. This is the study of group behavior, social influence, conformity, and interactions. It is absolutely staggering to realize that your individual internal architecture can be entirely overwritten by a network of other people. Take the famous Asch conformity experiments. Individuals routinely gave blatantly incorrect answers to incredibly simple visual puzzles simply because the rest of the group confidently gave the wrong answer first. The overwhelming pressure to align with the tribe can actually cause our brains to doubt our own sensory inputs. It proves that the social environment is a force just as powerful, if not more so, than our own internal wiring.
So if understanding the raw mechanics of our minds reveals exactly why we conform, how will you use this user's manual to consciously change your own behavior tomorrow? You now know how your neurons fire, how operant conditioning continually rewires your habits, and why you instinctively react to the pressure of the crowd. The power to step back, observe those biological mechanisms in real time, and consciously direct your own internal architecture is now firmly in your hands. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. Stay curious, keep learning, and I'll see you next time.